latest episode of the High Ground podcast. If you watched us like a month ago, we did this historical events parallels in Star Wars. Um, I was overly ambitious. I wanted to do all three trilogies, and we clearly that wasn't going to happen. So we did the prequel trilogy. Now we're going to move into the OT, and then in a month or so we'll do the sequel trilogy. But for now, we are going to jump into it right here on the high ground. Hello, my beautiful people, amazing guest, esteemed Star Wars fans. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to jump into this because it was fascinating. I felt more like you guys have all the knowledge. I felt more like a fly on the wall, just like sitting there wide eyed, just like, yay, taking it all in. So hopefully we get more of that. Um, and yeah, we actually have one more joining us, which is Monty, who was in the chat last time, bringing up some awesome points. And so I wanted to get his viewpoint as well. But yeah, I will start by going around the room, have everyone introduce yourselves, introduce yourselves, and where we can find your awesome content. And it's Women's History Month, so yeah, let's appreciate some of our amazing Star Wars ladies. Um, just whoever you want to appreciate, who doesn't get the appreciation, who is your favorite character, whatever that means to you. I'll go to St. Pat first.
Hi, St. Pat of Starfleet on TikTok. Do a miscellaneous amount of content, mostly jokes and memes. Sometimes here and there, I'll do a history parallel or analysis of something. So for appreciating the amazing women of Star Wars, I got first out my main girl, Rey Skywalker. She's one of my favorite Star Wars characters. She's in my top 3 Jedi list. I just love her. I love the energy that she brings to Star Wars and happiness. When she meets the original trilogy characters, she just feels like a fan, like we're in the film with her. And then another one I want to shout out is I think it's Senator Chuchi is her name from the
Oh
Clone Wars.
yeah, Senator Chuchi.
I loved her in the Clone Wars. Anytime she was on scene or got to speak, it was like watching Padme as a junior senator. It was great.
I love it. I appreciate that. And you follow St. Pat. He did my icon and well more stuff. So amazing artist and just always appreciate you, Pat. Yeah. How about you, Chris?
Oh, me. Hello. What have we here? I am Chris, aka Star Wars Lawyer. You can find me there on most um, social media platforms. And Star Wars ladies, I always got to rep. You know, the general, the princess Leia of Alderaan.
Here comes a general.
Exactly.
Sorry,
You get
had to do it.
it. Padme Amidala, Ahsoka Tano, Rey Skywalker, as Pat said, Sabe, the OG handmaiden, is the severely underrated character. Also, shout out to Ty York, Lula Talasola, Zine Morala, and Sana Staros. Not Gira Staros, but Sana Staros.
Man, forget Kira Staros. I love it. Awesome. How about you, Beth?
Hi, I'm Beth. You can find me at mara.j.skywalker on TikTok. And the Star Wars ladies I want to shout out are my two faves, Bo-Katan Kryze and Fennec Shand. They both look like they could punch me in the face and I would still say thank you. So
Absolutely. And Kiki?
Hello, everyone. I'm currently fighting with an earring, but happy Women's History Month. You can find me at Black PNW Lady on TikTok. I'm going to give a shout out to the amazing Pelimoto from The Mandalorian because we do not give enough praise in Star Wars, I think, to kind of the everyday folk, like the mechanics who like are doing the behind the scenes work. Without people like Pelly, there wouldn't be Star Wars. So
That's true. That's true. Well,
Gives
without
us
people
all the
like
awesome ships.
somebody has to fix that ship. That's all there is to it.
if we had more people like Pelly, the Falcon would actually work all the time, and then we wouldn't have Star Wars. So I'm gonna have to disagree. And real quick, I have Camilla in the chat. I know literally nothing about her, but I'm hyping up Reva on this glorious day, and yeah, we are going to get into that. Element 7 here says Star Wars ladies I want to shout out is Kiki, Beth, Camilla, Shaylo, Sawyer, Stoobs, etc. All the ladies in Star Wars, which
Everybody.
yeah, love all y'all. Last but not least, we have Monty. Yeah, where can we find you and your content, and what Star Wars lady you want to shout out?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. You can find me as.
Ooh, you're a little quiet.
There's no feedback.
Sorry, I don't know if you have a different mic selector or something like that, but it's very quiet.
Is this any better?
Not really. So maybe if you have some headphones, and then we can come back to you. All right.
I have my headphones. I was trying to connect on my phone and it wouldn't let me connect. So everything was connected to phone. Just bear with me a second.
No, that's fine. Just take a second, and we'll come back to Monty. But move forward, man. We had that real dope trailer drop today. I don't know how you guys felt. I even missed the part in the end because I was breathing so heavily. There's something that happened at the end. I thought it was me. Yeah. So what are you guys' thoughts on? I guess I'll get Chris first.
Okay. So I was listening in on the investor call, and or the shareholder meeting, and he was talking about things that were coming up, and he talked about Kenobi, and he said, "All right." And we have a special sneak, and I just instantly ran and grabbed my iPad. Granted, like I'm suited up because I had a deposition in 5 minutes over Zoom. So I like put up my iPad, it pulls it up. Like I missed like the first, I don't know, like 3 seconds of the trailer, but I'm just like watching it. I lose it seeing, baby Luke. Then they play Duel of the Fates. And then you see Reva and the Grand Inquisitor. And I too missed Vader's breathing at the end of the trailer. I didn't even recognize until after I sent it to my friend, and he was like, "Dude, they ended it with Vader's breathing." I was like, "Huh?" And then I had to like compose myself real quickly because I had to jump into a Zoom deposition. So I was like, "I'll freak out later."
I wish there was more nerds so that you could like jump into a deposition, and then everyone in there is like, I know we're on opposing sides, but damn.
No, it's funny. My co-counsel, my coworker, who's also on the case, who was there, he also loves Star Wars and watches it with his kids. So he texted me like while we were waiting. He was just like, "You see the Kenobi trailer?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
But what's funny is
Sorry to
right
interrupt.
after,
This better.
yes, that is
Yeah.
much better.
Sorry.
We when I first saw it, like as soon as I saw it, someone at work IM'd me, and it said, "What do you think?" And I was like, I've never talked to that person before. What are they talking about? And then they said something else, and it was a completely unrelated. They were sending a message to it with the wrong Brandon. But I was like, I got excited. I was about to jump in, go all out, but I'm like, who are you trying to talk to? Not me. Okay, I'm sad. And then I jumped in the server to catch up with y'all. But Beth, how did you feel? Are you okay? There's a few people that I was like, okay, we gotta check on Beth. We gotta check on Holly Deanne. We gotta check on Julia Christine. I feel like they may have combusted. How do you feeling?
There were a lot of tears. There have continued to be a lot of tears. I have so many thoughts. I don't know how like deep you want to like go into it. So many thoughts though. I guess just superficially, the Luke Anakin parallel sent me Duel of the Fates. Like now they're dueling for the fate of the children. Sent me. And then I had to also email into work. Luckily, I didn't have anything due today, and I told them I had a migraine and I was going to be offline because I literally could not function. So it was lots of crying. It was great though. I'm so excited.
I love it, and I know you have some deeper stuff. Let me hit everyone real quick, and then I want to hear what else you got. All right. How about you, Kiki?
I didn't know that it had dropped. I was minding my own black business, and then you see the Kenobi trailer, and I was like, "Oh Lord, here we go, here we go." And so I turned it on, and I like everybody else. I freaked out when I saw little Luke, and then seeing the Inquisitors, I was like, "Oh, we're gonna do this, okay." And then at the very end, of course, when I heard Darth Vader's breathing, I was like, kind of felt like I was taken back to that moment in like Rogue One, where everything just is dead quiet and you hear the breathing and you're like, there's no way they're going to do it. There's no way we're going to do it. And then I was like, oh, Vader's just going to come out of the left field in one of these episodes and none of us are going to be ready.
Yeah, I mean,
My body is ready.
if they do anything like they did him in Jedi Fallen Order, yeah, I'm gonna lose that.
You have failed me, Inquisitor.
He's not nice to Inquisitors, by the way. How about you, Monty? Your thoughts on it? And also, where can we find you and your content and your Star Wars lady? You got some catching up.
Okay, you can find me. Well, thanks for having me first of all, and sorry about the delay. I'm the old guy. So you can find me as Monty the Mando on TikTok. And you can find me on Amazon.com as Montgomery Harris. I've only got a couple of my books out there. That's not shameless self-promotion. It's just where you can find me. The shout out I've got to give to the women, Jyn Erso for being the most well-rounded character as a female in all of Star Wars. I think she shows her vulnerabilities, she shows her strengths. She is a bit of the badass type, but at the same time, she's a great character. And Hera Syndulla, because she goes after Imperials like Kiki goes after Star Trek fans. I mean, that is a badass.
It's a necessary war that I have begun.
I fought that one in the 80s. Don't go back there.
I just gotta say,
I lived through the 80s. Don't do it.
I feel a little offended with my my username in your war against Star Trek.
No, Kiki's doing the Lord's work. There's like all this weird drama going on. That's like, why is this here? And she's like, you know what? Star Wars is better. We're like, yes, this is my war.
I'm gonna walk up to a Star Trek fan and push their juice on the table and just keep eye contact. Like that's really what I did.
They scare me. But as for the trailer, I was a physical and emotional wreck. I've been waiting years for that, like we all have. We've been waiting years for that. But it's like Obi-Wan, may the remorse be with you. It's just you wanted to sort of like just go and pat him on the shoulder and say, it's gonna be all right, you're the badass. You are the one, man. But I already spotted one Easter egg already, as I told
yeah,
Mara there. I can't remember your real name, Beth, sorry. I did spot one Easter egg already, so my work is done. The blue sign says milk. Blue milk is in the trailer. Go see it.
Yeah, Blue Milk Factory or something. I don't know what it is, but it's churning it out. No, I love it too. Also, I didn't say any of mine, so I want to make sure I also shout out Hera Syndulla because mommy. I want to make sure that I shout out kind of in the same vein, Aralani. And no, I'm super excited to find out more about our girl Reva that we saw today, and then yeah, it's awesome. We're not when it comes to the representation, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there, and every step forward, every bit of progress, love it, absolutely love it.
Choco, can I just give someone a shout out real quick?
Yeah.
There's a brand new book out called Women of the Galaxy. I went and bought it the other day, and it is fantastic. It doesn't go too deep, but what a book. And it's got everything right up to Resistance in it. So if you want to see women in Star Wars, there's your best guide to start if you're not familiar with the franchise.
Absolutely. That is a beautiful book. I don't own it myself, but I am going to be getting a copy of it soon. And also, next week on the High Ground podcast, we're going to be having a bunch of other women of our Star Wars galaxy local here to TikTok and YouTube. So appreciate everyone. But yeah, all right. So we've all kind of, except St. Pat. I was like, something's off. St. Pat.
Oh, that's all good. That's all good. So for Kenobi, I like everyone here. I freaked out on the Luke scene. So for the whole trailer, I've been having a low day because of personal stuff I've been having. So when I was watching the shareholder meeting and this trailer came on, my mood just went skyrocketed up to gold. And it's like I think that's the power of Star Wars and how it impacts your life. But I obsessed so much on the Luke scene that I rewatched that scene maybe 5 times because he's being a pilot, but I swear every time I watch it, he's doing the pod racing Anakin moves, and I just love that so much. And then I have no idea who Reva is as a character. Is she from Fallen Order?
No, new.
No,
brand new.
Okay, so she's new, and there's one other new Inquisitor in there.
So
I will be dissecting.
I'm completely excited for all the new characters because as much as I love, Obi-Wan Kenobi is Space Lord. He's amazing, but I love anytime they bring in new characters because it adds more to the galaxy, and I cannot wait to see her in action and all the other Inquisitors. The Grand Inquisitor just looks fabulous. I got chills, and I love it.
Really
awesome. And so Guardian of the Wheel says that he thinks the Inquisitors look a bit goofy. It's just the translation of animated into live action. There's always going to be differences. There's always going to be certain things. He looked a bit too nice for me. You know what I mean?
He looked a little bulky on the chest plate.
Yeah, I love. They seem a little squat. Got cooked in the squat type deal. But
we don't know if this is the time in his life he goes from being bad to being downright evil, though, do we? This might be the story that does that.
Yeah, or there's still some time in between when we'll see him in Rebels. So, maybe this was like bulk season or something. I don't know. Anyway. Final thoughts. I hit everyone, but if anyone has some deep thoughts, Beth, I know you got some nugget cooking.
Oh, that'll take years. So no, I think just echoing everyone. I'm very excited.
All right, perfect. So jumping into the meat of the episode, we wanted to talk about the original trilogy and the historical parallels that we see. Once again, George Lucas did a masterful job weaving this modern mythology together by taking inspiration from real life situations. And it's fascinating because none of them are really, they typically aren't really one-to-one. So sometimes, the bad guys are, or it's not like the bad guys are that side and we're the good side. No, he mixes it up quite a bit, which is something I really enjoy. But yeah, I want to jump into it. Gave us some examples that came to mind, but you guys are all way more well-versed in history. I felt inadequate to even try to write topics. So I don't. If Beth, you want to lead off, and then people feel free to jump in and share your thoughts.
Oh my god. Sorry, for some reason it took my mic a minute there. Yeah, so I think I guess just I'll start off by saying one of the things obviously that separates the prequel trilogy from the original trilogy. Having some mic issues today. Sorry.
There's a lot of it going around.
Yeah, apparently. One of the things that separates like the prequel trilogy from the original trilogy, because I know we talked prequels last time, is the fact that the original trilogy has a very defined set of what is supposed to be good and what is supposed to be evil. And I think that works very well with the story. But it's interesting because obviously there are many historical parallels that during that time, coming at this from like an intellectual history standpoint, during the time the films were being made, there was a very clear good and evil in certain situations. So I found that to be kind of like a very fascinating, just I guess, difference between the two. As far as specific, do you want to go in like specific historical events or just like overall? Like,
Yeah, specific. However, whatever it means to you. I mean, I want to hear your thoughts. Feel free to get deep with it.
Oh god. I think, I mean, obviously we all know that like the empire is supposed to be a metaphor for like, you know, the rise of fascism and all of that bad stuff. And again, I think it's very, very clearly defined both symbolically and throughout the story. And I think that's something that because of the clear line between good and evil, and I guess this is a little bit more character based than historical, but I think that's part of what makes Vader's redemption so interesting, is because they did do it so clear. Whereas I think in this, I feel like there's so many mic issues.
No, you're fine.
Okay, I'm like, oh my god. But yes, that's my sign to stop talking then.
Okay. No, yeah. Anyone else's thoughts? I know, Pat, you have some.
Yeah, so just going back to the what we talked about in the prequels about aesthetics and George Lucas's masterful use and direction of the aesthetics for the parallels in the original trilogy, because he gives us the Empire that looks like Nazis. But when you really look at it, it's so well a critique of American imperialism, and I just love that, because if I've spent nights just thinking about how the movie would have been received in the 70s if he comes out blatantly stressing the Empire as Americans. How that would affect us as Star Wars fans? How would if these imperial apologists that we have now would actually be the main group or people of the fandom, and just how it would affect the story and why, because it was height of Vietnam War. There was a lot of polarization between if America is the good guy or if America is the bad guy, depending on where were you on the countercultural stance, and it would make a gray area on the bad guy, because the average American would see these people who are dressed as Americans being the good guy, while you have these terrorists who would then clearly become the Viet Cong. So I think George Lucas's way of giving the Imperial a definitive aesthetic of people we associate as evil coming out of the end of World War II, it was a brilliant tactic with him and the writers and the set designers of the time.
Yeah, amazing jobs aesthetically telling the story.
Can I just add something real quick there to what St. Patrick was saying? Because this is a great experiment anyone can do. If you watch the movie Captain Phillips, and you watch the movie and you watch the opening scene of the Tantive 4 trying to escape the Devastator, watch the two side by side and listen to them with a different music. Because in the movie Captain Phillips, you've got 3 US battleships chasing behind this lifeboat, and it's all like this dum 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 dum. We're the good guys music, right? And it's 3 Navy ships chasing a lifeboat. Sorry, I nearly swore that I'm English, but sorry. Right, but if you put that music to it, it's almost like the Devastator chasing the Tantive 4. But when you flip it on its head, the Tantive 4 is the lifeboat, and the Star Destroyer is coming after it. It's almost exactly the same scene with different music, in a hard to believe kind of way.
Which is why that one episode of the Mandalorian in season 2, they made us like root for for the Empire for a second, and you were like, "Yeah, oh no, what did
They're
they
not
do?"
nice.
For a second, you're like, "Hey, they did it." Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Let me take a look at my notes. Yeah, they're the bad guys.
I've just come off thinking Thrawn was a good guy.
Empire are the bad people in this.
Yeah. How about you guys' thoughts, Kiki?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts about it, but where to begin? I think that it's very interesting when you look at the original trilogy and the time periods in which they came out. Looking at how our attitudes were changing towards war in the 1970s when the first film came out in 1977. And I mean, I just did a huge series a while back on MASH on one of my channels, just talking about the show MASH. And, how it kind of was a critique of American imperialism, of American war tactics. And I look at Star Wars, and something I believe Pat said kind of like rung into my ear, which is, I wonder if George Lucas had been this open about the Empire is actually the United States, how would it have been received in the 1970s and the 1980s? I think, man, I don't know how it would have been received. I think there might have been a lot of criticism of that, just going off the top of my head. And I think the reason that MASH got away with being so critical of it was because it really was pushing into that anti-war sentiment. I know, I might have to actually take this back. I might actually have to take back what I've just said now that I'm thinking about it. I don't know how to bridge that gap, actually.
Interesting. All right.
Because, I mean, people were extremely critical of the United States' involvement in Vietnam and the usage of weapons in Vietnam and chemicals in Vietnam, but I'm not sure how they would have reacted if George Lucas had been that open in the 1970s and 80s that the empire is actually the United States. I think that would have ruffled a bit of feathers with a lot of the imagery that was being used for the empire, the visuals. I think that would have ruffled some feathers perhaps, but I wonder if it would have opened up a lot more conversations about American imperialism, about American power, in a different way that maybe it didn't, because that wasn't a main conversation around that franchise at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like had it been more direct, we probably wouldn't get any more. They probably would have, he'd have had a car accident or something like that. You never know. You never know.
Well, and I think, if I can just say this, I think, because he mentioned, I believe in 2004, 2005, about this being the US being the empire, right? That was kind of the first time he came public with that. And I kind of think that maybe, just with the politics of the 1970s and 80s, it's still the Cold War, right? Maybe he just wanted to avoid getting pulled into that conversation because he knew how sticky things would get for him. And so almost 30 years later is when he finally reveals that and had talked about it, was maybe when he finally felt he could talk about it and not have all of this tension that existed because of the Cold War and how things were as well. Because that's another layer to this. This is during the Cold War.
Nixon would definitely have some words, would have had some words with Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
No?
Nixon was already way gone. Nixon was gone by then.
No. How about you, Chris?
So where to begin. I'll start off with this. So I was planning for this podcast to have this book called Star Wars in History, which
Mhm.
is a compilation of academic essays looking at historical allegories and parallels of Star Wars to world history as it is. And I was looking at it after the last podcast, and it was $193, and I'm gonna be like, yeah. So I did find it for $27 used, but it won't be here for like a week and a half. So I'll have it, but I'll have it for the sequel one. But I think that's pre-sequel, so uh, I'll just have to make some videos. But when it comes to the original trilogy and historical parallels, we have Emperor Nixon, I mean Palpatine. Um, you have the U.S. imperial agenda when it comes to Vietnam, and I think that some of it comes from Lucas's sort of failure with Apocalypse Now, because that was going to be him and Spielberg sort of like Vietnam War film, and then he had to drop out of it. And then he has Star Wars. And I think he sort of injects sort of those feelings into it. And I think with the statement that that America is the empire probably would not have gone over well, at least domestically. That him being able to hide the hints of it in there for those that pay attention, I think he weaved it enough to now when he can say it comfortably and everybody's like, oh yeah, yeah. As opposed to, when he did the prequels and he's like, yeah, this is the Bush presidency. And people are just like, there's too much politics in this. This is boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think about the minute. I think Star Wars has always been political, right? It always has been. But I think, because I'm trying to think of like why Lucas would be quiet or not say anything. And I literally think it's because then maybe like he didn't want to have that conversation in the 70s and 80s. And keep in mind that the first Star Wars movie came out in 1977, right? The war in Vietnam officially ended about 1975 from my recollection. And this was a war, and I mean it's a war that still there's a lot of complicated feelings in the United States. um and I think, because I'm trying to think from his point of view, why would he be quiet? And I think maybe it was just something he felt he was not ready to touch on. And there would be just too much pain involved in that conversation. I think, especially with conversations that we were finally beginning to have about how the war had affected from domestic side veterans, and talking about PTSD and the fact that these veterans were coming back and they were telling us these horrific stories, and they were coming back with this trauma that our country we didn't have the facilities ready to work with and support them in the way that they needed. So this is 2 years after the end of that type of a war. And I think that he was treading very carefully at that point.
Yeah. You know what? I also, one thing that I think of is he directly says that the target audience for this was 12-year-olds, and he says 12-year-olds are smart, a lot smarter than we give them credit for. But if you wanted to make a story to warn a 12-year-old of the negative side of these types of conflicts, I also think that this would be a clever lens to do it, to make people think critically. Like, I mean, myself, I was, taught in school, like the United States dropped bombs on Japan and that ended the war, and it was such a great idea, and that's what they were supposed to do. And then I see the Death Star, and I was like, that's not good. That's a bad thing to do. And having something as simple as that recontextualized by feeling what it'd be like on the other side. There's a lot of people who are non-combatants who are not involved in this at all, and you don't care. That sucks. And Star Wars made me appreciate that when I actually like stopped and think about it, you know?
So I want to talk about the Death Star and Star Wars overall love with super weapons for a second, because I got a while back when I was in a Star Wars RPG group, I got in an argument with one of the members of the group over Star Wars and super weapons, and he's saying, "Well, why there's a second Death Star? Why is there another where is the Starkiller base? Well, I think there's a super weapon in KOTOR too," and
Mhm.
and I'm like, well, if you're looking at it from the perspective of the original trilogy, where America is the Empire, the atomic bomb is the Death Star, and we didn't just drop the two in Hiroshima and in Japan. Presidents have considered the nuclear options multiple times over the since the end of World War II. Truman wanted to use a series of nuclear bombs in the Korean War on the border between China and North Korea to create a nuclear wall, so so China can reinforce them. Nixon had considered using it 4 times during his presidency. One to end the Vietnam War, one to deal with the Arab-Israeli war, which we didn't have a lot of skin in at all, except for Israel was an ally. And so there's always a threat of a super weapon, and it's always going to be there, and it's a great immediacy to have hanging over your characters.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. But yeah, I always laughed at that complaint of like, you realize they don't stop making stuff that destroys other stuff. They want stuff that destroys more stuff, you know?
Well, I mean, that was kind of the American deterrence, right? This old, I think it was Theodore Roosevelt, it was like, carry a big stick.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're just going to stand here with our big stick. No, we're not going to use it, but you don't know if we're going to use it but we're just going to sit here with it and look at you. And walk silently, carry a big stick. And I remember watching the first, A New Hope, and when they blow up Alderaan. And I think more now about it in the context of the Cold War. What would it be like in 1977 to sit there and watch this empire blow up an entire planet, right? And this is coming off of, the heels much years earlier, the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you had lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, this is the scenario that we always feared. And you see this a lot with films from the Cold War in the 60s and 70s. For example, Planet of the Apes. What happens when we push the button and there is complete annihilation? So a lot of that imagery of Alderaan being destroyed, that was always in the back of your mind when you were during the Cold War, when you were growing up and living through it. And people who I've talked to who grew up during the Cold War have told me, they're like, there's always the end scenario in your mind of what could happen on any given day. And we got really close during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So
I grew up in the Cold War, and I served in the military in the Cold War. And let me tell you, you're quite right, Kiki. It was bloody terrifying. Mm-hmm. It was like, there's an old movie out there called Threads. It's a British movie, and we was played that at school. You see people burning in the streets as the bomb goes off, and we was played that at school. And I don't mean high school.
Right.
Like, I was 12. I didn't sleep for a week because I knew it was there, And we were told we had 8 minutes growing up in England. We had 8 minutes. That was all we got. Which was just the exact same amount of time it took me to run home from school, was 8 minutes. Admittedly, that was like a steady jog because I wasn't running away from a nuclear bomb, but 8 minutes was still a long time to get home, wasn't very long to get home. Can I offer another historical take real quick?
Oh, yeah. Fire them off.
I'm going to delve a little bit into the mind of George Lucas and the era when he grew up, which is also Cold War, but there was something else happen when he was about 15 years old or younger, 12 to 15 years old, like formative years for a young man in them days. And think about George Lucas's attitude towards big cinema, like, the big studio theaters, which he didn't like. And MacArthurism and the MacArthur witch trials. And George Lucas has always been very untrusting of the large companies, and he was always against the what he called the old white man dictatorship that was taking place in Star Wars. Like, I think it was George Lucas, Spielberg, and somebody help me out. My mind just went dead. Who directed The Godfather?
Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Coppola.
They were the three young men in Hollywood. That was it, really, pretty much. But like, Star Wars was released in 1977, so it started being made in 1955. He started writing it when he was at college, so that was 1962 when he was at SCU. So around that time, he's just coming off the back of the MacArthur witch trials. Whereas if you had any thought that didn't go along with what the Empire said, MacArthur was the emperor. He was coming down and saying, you went to a meeting in college where there was one person who was a communist who served the tea. Why were you there? And then you get blacklisted from Hollywood. And what happened to George Lucas after he made THX? He got blacklisted. The Star Wars won Best Movie of the Year, Best Sound, Best Editing, Best Costume Design. Never Best Movie and never Best Director. He was completely shunned. And I think they took offense to it because there is a parallel between the Emperor and the Empire and the MacArthur witch trials, which happened after World War II, which was also a symptom of the Cold War.
Wow.
So I see. Sorry, the screen just flashed, and as you know, I'm blind. It just scared me.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. My eyes. But there's a parallel there to how it might have felt to George Lucas on a personal level, because he was a 1950s cruiser. He was taught to be terrified of Russia, terrified of this. But the one person who was doing all the witch hunting and telling me, being all Fahrenheit 451 and Big Brother, was actually Hollywood at that time. Well, Hollywood was the ones being persecuted. So there's a parallel there.
That's interesting.
It's not related to war, but to society and culture.
Mm-hmm.
I love
And
that.
I've got another one to
I
add, but I'm going to let everybody else go first. But that's the one
I
parallel
love that. I
drew.
never thought about that. That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. But,
And then Beth, it looked like you had something to say.
Nothing as insightful as that. Nothing as insightful as that.
I feel all big-headed now.
Going
yes,
back
I'm very
to-
intellectual. I'm going to smoke a pipe.
Going back to the super weapon discussion, I think when people always ask why Death Star 2, why Starkiller Base, it's like history has always had its super weapons of their day, where you start with the compound bow, Greek fire, or as we know it now, napalm, the archer cavalry that the wow, why can't I think of Genghis Khan's? The Mongols had the polyreme warships. Going for the bombards in the 15th century. You keep going, and as technology develops, someone's going to come up with one way to hold it over our heads. That's why we didn't just stop with the atomic bomb. We then went, hydrogen, thermonuclear, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Like, we don't need to use planes now. We're just going to launch it from the other side of the world. Humans are always poised to try to find the best way to destroy each other. And I think with Star Wars, when you have something that literally just wipes out a whole planet, it's like, okay, how do you improve upon that? Make a bigger one. Okay, how do you improve upon that? Make an even bigger one. Like that's pretty much what you got to do. So
You read
if
the
you're
Kevin J. Anderson books.
yeah, yeah, if you're trying to be top dog, you got to get yourself a planet killer.
Well, and I think this fear, it still exists to this very day. Like, I mean, I came into this world in the early, the 90s. But even growing up and even now, I think it says a lot about us as a race, a human race, that when any type of conflict begins in any type part of the world, right? The conversation eventually spirals down to, oh God, what if it's World War III? And if it's World War III, we're bringing out the nuclear weapons and it's game over. It's a lot of rhetoric that I've heard, especially about with this recent conflict with Ukraine and Russia. And I don't want to get into that because I'm not the right person to speak on that conflict. But the rhetoric that I have heard people using about it's going to be World War III and we're going to use nuclear weapons, I'm kind of like, it's very interesting. This is rhetoric that we heard in the 80s, 70s, 60s, when anything got tense between these two superpowers, between the Soviet Union and the United States. So we have never truly let go of that being a possible fear. And I think it's because, of course, we have people who are still alive, who lived through the Cold War. We still have these weapons pointed at each other, and just because the Cold War ended doesn't mean that fear of those weapons being used has ever truly left us as a human race.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that they brought back the second Death Star, I've got a lot of feelings about that, but it's a fear that has never truly left us. Like, we have buttons, we have keys, and all it takes is an order for us to blow ourselves up.
Mm-hmm.
And the order comes from a couple of people. The rest of us really don't get a say if that's the path we choose.
Yeah.
Thank God for mutually assured destruction, right?
Yeah.
I think something that's really interesting about the concept of the Death Star is how obviously it was conceived in a very specific time period, but we have additional pieces of media like Lost Stars or like Rogue One that have kind of, I don't want to say like recontextualized it, but given us additional information about kind of how both sides have reacted to it being created, its consequences, etc. So yeah, I just find that really interesting as far as, because I think one of the things that when we discuss World War III, there's so much like this fear of the unknown. And in the Star Wars universe, it became a known. Everybody saw what happened to Alderaan, and you have, the propaganda everywhere, the Remember Alderaan posters and stuff like that. So yeah, but it's interesting if you think about the influence of some of the newer media on it as well.
Yeah, along with that, it makes me think of the book Legends of Luke Skywalker, where it's a bunch of like short stories, and some of them are terrible, but there's a few like nuggets in there, and one of them is just a straight up conspiracy theorist where they're like, okay, so Luke Skywalker isn't real. He was a guy named like Luke Clodplotter, and they didn't destroy the Death Star. The Death Star never existed. It was just like a farce that they used to control people. And then these people, these rebels, figured out that it didn't exist. So they faked footage of the Death Star blowing up and saying that they blew it up. And then the Empire knew that they knew it wasn't real. And so they had to just like backpedal, and like they just like start spilling into this whole thing, and it's hilarious. But
I mean, we like Beth was saying, we see it in Rogue One when Krennic goes to Vader. There is no Death Star. The Senate has been informed that Jeddah was destroyed in a mining disaster. Like, everybody's just like, that's a really big mining disaster, dude.
So that thing's supposed to mine planets?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, if you blow up a planet and all the rocks are out there, you just send out a few space crews and get to work.
Just to tap onto what Beth was saying there, if you've read Catalyst, there's a lot of comparisons between Galen Erso and Albert Einstein when it comes to kyber crystal energy. If you go into it with that mindset, because Albert Einstein was actually like the brain that inspired the atomic bomb, believing it was a cause for energy, and Galen Erso does exactly the same thing with kyber crystals, actually believing that it was an energy source. Like most of the work done by Galen Erso was to create a free energy source and end poverty. There's some good comparisons there on a historical point of view.
It's a great book. Yeah, he was trying to like build contained energy so that you could drop it on a planet that had no resources and just use this to power the planet. And Krennic just has another team that's just mapped over the first one. He's like, we're gonna do all the same stuff, but make it blow things up. And yeah, and that only lasted so long, but until they were like, yeah, we need you specifically.
Yeah.
And I love Krennic because he's the first ever Imperial bad guy not to have a British accent. Thank you so much for doing that, Star Wars. Right? Because we're not.
There's a whole thing to unpack with villains having British accents.
It's weird. You're like, are these guys Russian? Why are they?
There's a reason for it. It's actually called BAOC. BAEOC is what it's called, and it's British Air of Assumed Authority. That's why you see shows like The Super Nanny coming over here and giving advice to parents when there's 100 Americans who could do it just as well. It's just that JoJo says, "Go sit on the naughty step, you little bastard," right? Because she does that with the British accent, it's assumed air of authority. And also, there was a lot of British actors where the movie was made.
That's true.
Oh, and by the way, all of those officers who were sat in the Death Star all came from roles where they played draconian people. They were all like police chiefs, and in their shows, like the guy who's got the mutton chops sitting next to the guy who gets choked. I can never remember his name.
It escapes me as well.
He's got the bald head and the mutton chops. He used to actually play a policeman called Bullman who used to beat confessions out of people, you know. So it was like that kind. All of those characters that were sat around the table already had a pre-existing reputation of playing people who were not so nice, and then they were all there for the world to see, you know. So.
I just wish we got to see Peter Cushing in his slippers, like the story.
I just canonize that Tarkin wears slippers around whenever he's working, and people just allow it.
That's when you've got star power, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not the goal to get high enough on the food chain to where you're just like, is he wearing pajamas? He's like, are you gonna tell him not to? Good.
Do you want to know? Do you want to know a stupid, really interesting piece of trivia about Peter Cushing?
Go for it.
He wore the slippers, and he always played these nasty men, like, you know, the villains and stuff, like Frankenstein and all those people, and Grand Moff Tarkin. When his wife died, he actually went onto a British show and said, I would really love it if you could work with me to do a show where I get a flour made bread just for my wife's name, just so that the world can remember her. So you've got this guy who plays these really horrible villains who has a heart that good that he thinks when his wife passed, the only thing he wanted to do was create a flower in her name so everyone knows how beautiful she was. I'll get my coat.
Well, now I'm sad.
Yeah. Suck on that one, Obi-Wan. But yeah, that's a true story.
So I've been here sitting with the thought since Kiki brought up MASH, and I just finished watching A New Hope, and there is a part of me really sees a whole part of Luke's journey is delving into the romanticism of war. Because A New Hope Luke really reminds me of an episode of MASH where the actor Richard Cunningham comes onto the show, and he plays a minor who lied about his age to get enlisted in the Korean War, and then he figures out the horror of war once he's at the MASH hospital, and that just if I take that in mind, I'm looking back at Luke's journey. It really is that he gets to be in New Hope. He gets to be an X-wing pilot. It's what he's wanted to do. He's even going to Empire to do it. Even if he stated himself he doesn't like the Empire, but he wanted to be a fighter pilot. So they're going to do. And then when you get to Empire Strikes Back, he goes to Dagobah, a swampy, marshy place like Vietnam was, and then he's really getting into the nitty-gritty of it. And then he comes out at Return of the Jedi, where he throws away his weapon. He doesn't want to be. He wants to take a peaceful route. He doesn't want to be the warrior anymore. And that's that innocence to adult, through finding out the romanticism of war that you're told isn't true, just plays in my mind.
I always got mad at Luke when he tossed the lightsaber away. I'm like, you could have put that bad boy on your on your hilt. You know, like, why'd you have to be like ye? I mean, like, okay, you did that and you did it in the Last Jedi. Like, stop tossing lightsabers, man. It never works out for you.
Yeah, you could carve a turkey like a.
It's Anakin's son. He's going to be as extra as possible.
Yeah, them Skywalker men in the drama.
I wanted Luke to.
There's one thing to love about like the Skywalker family is that they are extra from day one. Every single one of them. Dramatic.
They'd all be theater kids.
All dramatic. Every single one of them.
Now,
the only one that was not dramatic was like Shmi. Like she was the only one who had it together in that entire Skywalker line.
See, now I just want a scene of Luke picking out his outfit before he goes to Jabba's palace. Because he's just like, all right, what am I gotta be intimidating, but
With the Coco Chanel boots.
You know, before then he was modeling for Lando and Leia, and they were giving him tips.
Elzar man is trying to communicate through the cosmic force. Pick the boots, the beautiful boots.
Could you imagine him standing there going, I want something that says I'm capable of being very dark, but light on the inside, but not so light that I'm a pushover. Let's go with the grey panel today.
yeah, that's my headcanon. All right, you won't be able to convince me otherwise.
I have another historical comparison for you if you want it.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Okay, I've got two actually, but they're related to the same thing. So bear with me here, all right? But who's ever heard of the Bismarck?
Yeah.
I'm
I'm totally not Googling that as you talk about it. Not happening at all.
No, I was like, I've heard of it, and I'm trying to like mine information from my brain, but I'm also telling my brain, do not
Sink
think
the
about
Bismarck
Bismarcky.
You're
Do
talking
not
about
think
the
about
Gauchos, right?
Bismarcky.
Yeah, Sink the Bismarck is free on YouTube. I encourage everyone to watch the movie because it was done very factually in some respects, but they dramatized because it was still made during World War II. They had to dramatize some of it, but there's a lot of comparisons between the Bismarck and the Death Star, especially when it comes to the battle. You see, Britain was on their own, right, for a small period of time. We're completely on our own, and we relied solely on the Liberty ships coming across from America, right? And we had to send the ships back. That was part of the deal, you know. And we was losing the war of the Northern Atlantic badly. You know, the U-boats were taking out people. My grandmother told me that it come to so bad at one point, it was one spread of the knife with butter, and then you turn it upside down on your tongue so that you can get the taste. This is how ration they were, you know. And they used to drink their tea almost cold, so the sugar didn't dissolve properly, and that way they could have 2 cups of tea. You know, it was like that was the height of rationing. My mom didn't have a chocolate bar until she was 3 years old, and she was born in 1952. You know, it was like the rationing went on for that long, all because of the boats. So just to give you the context of how desperate it was in England at that time. The biggest threat to this problem was the Bismarck, which was the Germans' only battleship, and it was gigantic. It was the biggest battleship in the world at that time. And people knew if it got to the Atlantic, the war was over, right? The war was over completely. And so when they found out it was traveling, because a spy gave his life getting that information to the British, there's hint number one, right? They threw everything they could to stop this ship getting past. And in the end, like, the HMS Hood went on and it just completely blew up. Like, I think it was 1,390 men dead in the blink of an eye. 3 survivors got off it. It was a complete and utter mess. So the only way they could destroy it was to cripple it, right? And it took 6 squadrons of aircraft to cripple it before it could be sunk. And the photographer who consulted on that movie was used on the Death Star run, as he was with the Dam Busters movie. So there's a context for you. You know, it was like this guy who actually worked as a cameraman on Star Wars knew this. And it was essentially the Death Star, because if it had made its way out into the open sea without squadron after squadron making runs, and if you look in the movie, they have to fire a torpedo into its weak point, which is the rear propeller, in order to stop it. Almost like it's an exhaust panel, because it's only about the size of, you know, a one Pratt, say 2 meters. And
It's no bigger
basically,
than a Womp Rat.
yeah. But that is one real comparison. But the other comparison that goes with it so well is there was another major battle that was very close to it, and I'm going to get to my point when I've told you about this battle. It was called the Raid on Saint Nazaire, right? It's considered the greatest raid of all. And basically, Saint Nazaire is 3 miles inland from the Atlantic Ocean, right? And to get to it, you have to ride right down the middle of this river, right? Past all the guns and everything. And they're firing at you as you're going down, and 3 miles along this. And the ship that they used was the Campbelltown, and they packed it full of explosives and drove it into the dock, which would have been used to repair small battleships. So by taking this out of the war, they kept all of Germany's surface navy out of the war, and they had to go down a 3 mile long river, guns firing all the way. Then guys jumped off, blew up the rest of the stuff that was there, and 3 ships made it back. 3 of the small crafts made it back out of that. Was it. But they had to smash into a dock. They had to smash a ship into a dock to win the battle. And the other part of the mission was to take out the Cassians, which I found funny when I was reading. But they're 2 real life raids that could have been picked up and dropped straight into Star Wars. And the reason I'm bringing these 2 things up is, in Britain growing up, because the Empire went into our head as the Nazis, right? Because growing up in England, we couldn't have cared less about American capitalism and imperialism, right? Because we was giving up an empire at the time. You know, we was like, we did this once and we don't want it anymore. And it wasn't a good thing when we had it anyway, you know? And we learned all that about that in school. Being an empire was bad, and they taught us that. So when we was at school seeing all this happening, what that told us was this was the last stand. This is almost like the rebels, to all intents and purposes, were Britain, because that's what we had to do, you know? And it's a cultural difference, but how it's interpreted differently based on historical events. I need a glass of water now. I'm done. I yield.
No, that's really, and that's one of the reasons I definitely wanted to have you on, because, you know, the rest of us here are American, and meaning we've grown up with a very strict perspective, and then you having been in war and obviously from somewhere else, that's crazy. This is
And
fat.
I just want to
I
point
don't
out
have a
I
lot
am
more stuff I
American.
need to research.
Yeah. I just want to point out I am an American. I paid a lot of money to become one. I just wasn't born here.
Awesome.
But yeah, that's how it's taken culturally different. Sorry, I yield back.
No, that's fine. No, I always find it interesting, the parallels between and I guess not a lot of this is, not all of it is in the original trilogy, but the concept, but where we actually are getting the concept of the Jedi Knights, and their role and how it plays into both the Knights Templar, as well as, they're really based off of a, like an amalgam of Eastern religious practices. I'm curious if you guys had any thoughts on those, and how, because I think it's interesting. A lot of times they get portrayed oddly by people with Western um, thoughts on things, as if it's their way of thinking being different is automatically a negative. But yeah, I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that, which is okay if you don't.
I don't really understand the question.
Not
I'm
so much
sorry,
a question, just
like-
another kind of thought prompt to see if we had any other things to kind of go on. But no, that's perfectly fine. No, this has been a really fascinating and eye-opening conversation. I definitely appreciate it a lot.
I think what's really interesting about Star Wars, and you think about the Empire, you think about the Rebellion, and something I've said before, which is Star Wars has an extremely relatable story. Like, you can see yourself, almost most people, I would say, can see somewhat of themselves in Luke Skywalker and his story. And one thing, there was this entire thing about, oh, well, people of color are coming in and they're forcing wokeness. It was a thing that was going on in Star Wars fandom at one point, and still is. But I was like, well, what about the story of Luke Skywalker makes you think this would not appeal to a diverse community or to diverse communities? You have a young man whose family is killed by an authoritarian regime, an empire. It radicalizes him to go and join a rebellion to take down the empire that murdered his family. How many times have you heard that almost exact same story throughout history about an empire, a colonizing power coming in, killing people, and then that radicalizes people to join a rebellious movement against that colonizing power, against that empire, against that invading force? And I think when you take a step back from it, when people watch Star Wars, and we talked a little bit about, well, do you think people would have recognized back in the 1970s that the empire was supposed to be the United States? Well, I don't think they did, because they automatically made a connection to Luke Skywalker because he's the protagonist, he's the good guy. And they thought to themselves, obviously that would be us. Obviously that would be me. I would be up against the big bad empire. That would be me in this scenario. And completely, of course, ignoring, well, maybe you're one of the bad guys, or you're part of the bad guys. And, how many times have we had this exact conversation in the last 4 years about people saying like, oh, well, this and that politically is the empire, and being like, well, look at what the empire stood for. Look at what this group of people stand for. Who do you think is the empire in this scenario? And people make these different connections to the Star Wars universe of who do they think? Are they the rebellion or are they the empire? And they like to usually chalk up, well, this group of people is the empire. And I'm obviously would be part of the rebellion. And I've always found that very interesting when we think about Star Wars and we talk about Star Wars, is how people latch on to the rebellion and Luke Skywalker and they see themselves there, but they absolutely refuse to see any bit of who they could possibly be attached to as part of the empire.
Yeah. No, and one of the big things that I think also comes out overall of the original trilogy is the overall message of it's always, the how we treat the small or what we would consider weak, um, is kind of what dictates who we are as people. You think of, um, at one part of it is the rebels. They're just a small, fringe group, and then it gets smaller. But like it gets so small that it's like you didn't care about droids, and so you lost. You didn't think Ewoks were worthy of anything, and so you lost.
Yeah.
And I think it always comes down to, once any group gets to a certain size, and looks down upon other groups, well, that ends up being the downfall. That is what A, radicalizes, and B, leads to subversion.
I don't think, to go on what you and Kiki were saying, Brandon. I think the other thing that makes it identifiable is there isn't a person in this conversation or a person being involved in the chat right now who hasn't been forced to be a rebel at some point. Just because you want your voice to be heard. You know the old saying, you'll break a stick on a man's back before you'll break the back of a man's spirit. Is that a saying used in America?
I've never heard it myself, but
But I like it.
It's
Yeah,
a good one, right? But we've all had to rebel at some point, right? Because when I was like 7 or 8, right, my nickname for my dad was Darth Vader, right? Because he was the one who wouldn't let me go and play soccer after dark, right? So he was Darth Vader, and we've all rebelled against our parents. People have rebelled against the church, right? There isn't a person here who hasn't rebelled against someone at some point.
Yeah.
So straight away, we see ourselves rebels because we've all been rebels. We've never all been imperial. We've never all had that draconian authority over someone else. To be quite frank, I'd never want that. I wouldn't like, I was like, your lack of faith disturbs me. I'd never want to do that to somebody.
I do. It's
like
fun.
that, crushing your head. But it's... I showed my age there. But we've all had to rebel at some point. All of us. And that's what makes rebellions, without being radicalized even, Like...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and that's why we get so many other dystopian, Hunger Games and Maze Runner and all these other things where it is... I mean, it's. I think it comes down to the feeling of powerlessness. We've all felt powerless at some point, but we
That's why
haven't
it's the
all had
perfect
power.
trope for young adult novels. The
There
perfect
are-
trope for a young adult novel is to be a rebel.
There are two quotes that I think ring very true in Star Wars, or at least can be gleaned from Star Wars. One is, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. And the other one is, society honors living conformists and dead rebels.
True
Yeah.
story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Che Guevara was a murderous bastard, but during the 1970s, he was on the poster of every student. He was on the poster of every student's wall. No, his poster was on the wall of every student growing up, and people used to walk around with T-shirts on him, power to the people. But at the end of the day, he was a murderer.
And talking about Star Wars and power, on the prequel one, I brought up the anthropological theory of man's theories of power, the political, military, economic, and that's 4, right? Yeah. And I talked about how in the prequels, Palpatine, Sidious is a master of all 4. 4, but in the original trilogy, you kind of see a study on how just focusing on one of those power pattern channels decimates and crumples your power. And he specifically how in anthropology, going off of man's theory, military power is the quickest and easiest way to gain power, but it's also the easiest way to lose it because you can only push it so far before it runs out of any subtle actual substance to control the people that you want to control. Because at some point, fear, people just get used to it. They might become conformist, or they might like, this is my life. This is going to be something better, and there's going to be a pushback just as a response from having it there all the time. And if Sidious had, instead of just breaking the separatists further with the Empire after winning the Clone Wars, it had rebuilt them or gone into relief like we did with the Europe powers in Germany with the Marshall Plan after World War II. I don't think the rebellion would have had that strong surgency or energy that it did because they weren't being punished and stuff. But Sidious just doubled down on this military power because of the dark side, obviously. But he just used it so much, and that use of that power, because it's so fleeting, led the rebellion to rise.
And that's an interesting point because that's kind of reflected in the Alphabet Squadron books, where in Alphabet Squadron they have this is post Operation Cinder, but the things are still popping off, and they have this place called Trader's Remorse, and this is where people defect from the Empire, and a lot of people are given a leeway and forgiveness and help to rebuild. But it just if you haven't read Alphabet Squadron, I'd highly recommend it.
It's on my list. I have so
You know,
many-
that's based
so
off a
many
court.
books.
Sorry, that's based off a court in Rwanda. Traitor's Remorse. After the Rwandan Civil War, there was a court held up where all you had to do was go in and say, "I'm sorry for everything I did," and they'd let you go. But you had to show genuine remorse, and that was your sentence to show. Like if you showed genuine remorse, you was pardoned, and Traitor's Remorse was based on that.
That's interesting. Yeah, in the other side,
Used information.
no, this is really there's a lot of stuff I didn't know. But that's really cool because the other side of it is there are these people where this war is essentially over in the book, but there's these groups that are fighting each other because that's all they know now. That's all they have left. And their commander is like, I don't even want to be here anymore, but I'm doing it for these people because they don't have a place to go back to. It's just, I don't know, it's interesting.
I love that internal conflict in Erica Bell as well, while she's at Traitor's Remorse and continues on afterwards. That internal struggle that she goes through is she's just an amazing character.
Oh man. All of those characters have just such compelling internal struggles, specifically her and Erica Quell, and what's her name that takes on that's the big Jyn Erso fangirl.
Oh yeah, the one who ends up. Oh, I'm not going to say that; it's a spoiler. Yeah.
If you haven't read Alphabet Squadron, please read it. It's first book is good. Second book kind of lost me a little bit. Third book, incredible. One of my favorites. Made the whole thing worth it. Yeah. Anyways, thank you guys so much for coming out and joining me. I do want to go around and get your guys' closing thoughts and Yeah, so we can wrap up. If you have any closing thoughts, once again, where we can find you, or if you have anything coming up that you want to promote or talk about, and we'll end it with one more thing you're excited about for Kenobi. And let's go to. We'll start with Monty first.
Me? Oh God! Nearly give me a second to think about that. Okay, the one thing I'm most excited for Obi-Wan Kenobi show is I want to see the interaction between Kenobi and the Lars family, because they were all Luke's protectors and we've never seen them interact on screen or in any novelization or extended universe. Never seen them react. So apart from the one, no, they weren't even in the Kenobi book, were they? So we've never even seen that. So I'm really excited to see that kind of interaction. And my other one is there's a lot of people talking about diversity and wokeness in Star Wars right now and complaining about it. And I'd just like to remind all those people, the Force surrounds us all, it penetrates us and makes us all one. So shut the F up. That's it.
Awesome. I appreciate it. How would you say, Pat?
Let's see. I'm really, because I think it's basically being confirmed that Jimmy Smith is coming back as Bail Organa in Kenobi, and I love Bail Organa so much, so I'm really excited just to have him back and to see how, in what ways he interacts with Obi-Wan, because it's a great duo.
Yeah, absolutely. And and sorry, where we can find you and your content?
We're on TikTok as St. Pat of Starfleet. There's a period and an underscore somewhere in there.
And Chris?
I am Chris, aka Star Wars Lawyer, on YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, and TikTok, and Chris KRIS_SWL on Twitter. One thing I should have mentioned earlier, I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about Kenobi, is shout out to Deborah Chow, man. Like just what we've gotten with the trailer, you know, some of the shots and everything. Just shout out to her. She's gonna give us a great series. But I'm looking forward to, if we're seeing Jimmy Spitz seeing a young Princess Leia, because I'll probably lose it. Because, you know, Luke already got me emotional seeing like a young Luke looking like Anakin, and seeing a young Leia that's on the other side of the age of when we first saw Padme.
Man, why you gotta say it? Like, as soon as you did, my eyes were like, just what? No, it's like,
Oh, yeah, I mean, Chaco, you're familiar with the Prince of Egypt, right?
yeah.
So, you know, Camille and Beth were live earlier, and they were talking about Moses allegories to Kenobi being in the desert. Just imagine Deliver Us being sung, and at Moses' mother's part where she's saying, "Hush now, my baby," that's Padme singing to Luke and Leia before she gives them up, before she dies. Anyway, the Filoni hat was on today. You're welcome.
Don't do that,
And yeah,
man.
you're welcome.
Just slap me around the head next time, Chris. Man.
You know I've been at a low point today. Don't do that.
It's beautiful.
Rocking it.
Also, one more quick shout out to Two Black Two Nerdy podcast.
Oh yeah. I forget to shout out my podcast. I should do that. Also, Xanthi, Star Wars Music Minute, and I are doing a Star Wars Music Madness challenge going on. Right now it's the prequels and the originals. There you can vote on the matchups going on right now. Sequels and TV shows and anthologies are next week.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. I actually just recorded with Xanthi in the for Solo, and it's going to be fun. So Star Wars Music Minute, check that out as well. How about you, Beth?
Oh man, so many things. I think as far as I guess you can find me at mar.j.skywalker. Only on TikTok. I'm on Instagram too, but it's like under a different name. Also, I can only focus content creation in one area.
I feel that.
It's a lot. As far as the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, I think what I'm most excited to see is a different version of a character that people are very familiar with. And he is going to be having both a journey that is obviously there is some action, but it's going to deal with a lot of internal conflict. And I don't think that's something that we've really seen explored in Star Wars, especially in a male character in a form of media. And I think obviously he will be dealing with a lot of like guilt and PTSD and whatnot. So it's going to be interesting to see that side of this character that people have always kind of viewed as a perfect Jedi. And I have a lot to say about that, but I will not. So I'm fascinated to really get in his mind. I think that's what I'm really excited for.
Yeah, I agree, because I think a good part of the beginning of it has to be him trying to make himself, pay penance for what happened, and not. How do you reconcile with that guilt, especially when you see the state of the galaxy, and know that you trained that person and you could have stopped it? It's got to be crazy. Anyways, yeah, definitely looking forward to that as well. And Kiki?
So Black PNW lady on TikTok and on Instagram. What was like the final, what was the final thoughts, or was it like what I'm excited for?
Both. Yeah, final thoughts overall and what you're excited for.
I think that when you're watching any kind of media where there are villains, where there's a portrayal of an empire or a tyrannical government, if you live in a country that has had a history of being the colonizer, that has had a history of being the imperialist, it might be tempting to look at the rebels and say, well, that would obviously be me. But also it's imperative that you take a step back and be like, but based on my nation's history, maybe the bad guys are also me, and maybe do some reflection on that. I think what I'm most excited for with the upcoming Kenobi series is, seeing Darth Vader. I'm not gonna lie, but seeing Jimmy, that's kind of got me excited. Like, I remember like seeing him play Senator Organa back in the day, but I really know him really well from The West Wing as Matt Santos. So I'm like, let's bring him back. I love it. It's gonna be like Matt Santos in Star Wars. I'm down for this.
Beautiful.
I remember him NYPD Blue, and you wasn't even born.
Kiki, you said Matt Santos, and I was getting ready to say his DNC speech. I was ready. I feel it, just bubbling up in my soul.
He was so great. He was so great on West Wing. I loved him. It was great. And of course, I was watching it after show. So when he showed up, I'm like, oh my god, that's Bell Organa. This is what he was like.
Hey, this is that Leia's dad.
I'm like, and he was like, this is definitely how he was in the Galactic Senate.
This was the true. This is the true Bill Organa.
I actually have a poster downstairs in the basement of Jimmy Schmitz's Liberals speech from the West Wing.
Oh.
I don't do politics on my stream, but down in my basement, it's a political hive of great, industry. And Jimmy Smith is, I'm a teacher, it's, but that speech that Jimmy Smith gives, I've got that one and the other one from the news show that Aaron Sorkin did as well. What was it called?
The press.
The newsroom.
The newsroom.
Mm-hmm.
The newsroom. Yeah. They're like two posters I've got down there, which I had myself.
Awesome. I love it. And oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait to get into the parallels for the sequel trilogy, which we'll probably do in another month or so. But
are we doing a High Republic? Because I got a list for you. I got a list.
Woo! If you got a list for High Republic, I didn't even think about it. Because I got nothing myself for that. I mean, I'm not good with this topic anyways myself, but
I've been reading the Restyles book before Fallen Star, and like I've been struggling to find. And then Vanestra said something, and like, oh, okay, and it just created a flood.
well, yep, I can't wait. All right, guys, thank you all very much.
Before we go,
always
can I just
appreciate-
throw one thing in there, please?
Absolutely,
It's-
go for it.
It's a theory I've heard nobody discuss about, and it's complete headcanon. But when at the end of Solo and Chewbacca are leaving for Tatooine, and that's 10 BBY. This is 10 BBY, and we're going to be seeing Kenobi. So just bear in mind that Chewbacca was very pally and easygoing with Kenobi in the cantina in the original Star Wars. I'm not making any theories. I'm just saying.
That gives me some things to ponder.
Mull that one over.
All right, guys. Thank you, everyone. And for anyone that's still hanging out in chat, please, as Luke from Padawan's podcast say, deploy the likes. I have a habit myself of joining streams and never clicking the like button, so it always helps. But yeah, thank you guys all for joining me. We will talk to y'all next time, and may the